Hello, this is Dr. Dennis Bielfeldt of the Christ School of Theology. We're talking about the argument from Scotus that reasons to the possibility that there is something that has the property of being an absolutely first causal power. In the last little lecture, I gave his argument that was supposed to show that it's possible that there is such a being. And if you remember this, we had a temporal series here, maybe A, B, C. But this whole temporal series is a produced thing, which is produced by something in the order of ontological dependency. And what he is arguing now is that there's a possible unproduced producer. It's possible for there to be an unproduced producer. Now, this is the absolutely first efficient causal power is the unproduced producer. So if it is possible that there be an absolutely first efficient causal power, then it follows then that if a being A cannot exist from another, then it is possible that A exists if being A, now let me say this again, I'm sorry. If a being, now A is going to be down here. Okay. If a being A cannot exist from another, it's an unproduced producer, then if it is possible that A exists independently. Right? If it is possible for it to exist, then A exists independently. If an absolutely first efficient cause cannot exist from another, then an absolutely a first efficient cause exists independently. Now, I don't know the force of conviction that argument has on you, but it certainly reminds me of arguments that we often find that connect to the ontological argument. When we're talking about God, it seems like if it's possible that God exists, then God exists. Just as in mathematics, if it's possible for a result to obtain in a solution, then that result obtains. And it's a question of the modality here of God, basically. And if God is a contingent type of thing like sheep in the pasture, then you can't reason from the possibility of a sheep in the pasture to the actuality of a sheep in the pasture. But if God is either necessary or impossible, then you get into a whole different landscape here in your reasoning. And there is a bit of that going on here. I'm trying to make this at least somewhat relevant to you, that when you get to A, if A is possible, then A is actual. Well, are you convinced? These arguments all depend upon the notion of an essentially ordered series, but is this series plausible? Are there such things? A whole lot of people would say no. Bertrand Russell certainly didn't think that there were essentially ordered series in this way, and when he had his debate with Father Copplestone, he did not really understand what Copplestone was trying to say here. Copplestone, with these essentially ordered series. And when an analytical philosopher gets a hold of an essentially ordered series, it soon looks like something a bit different than the proponent of the essentially ordered series wanted to say. All of this has to do with analysis. Nobody's being bad. Everybody's using reason to try to figure things out. And it could be that a lot of mischief is being hidden in this idea of an essentially ordered series. Well, can one move from the possibility of an absolutely first efficient causal power to its actuality? Well, I tried to say, well, if you think about God in certain ways, maybe. But many would not think that way, and it does give us a lot of non-intuitive results. Why must something for which it is impossible to depend upon something else itself exist? Just because it's impossible for A to depend on something else, if it's, well, that's basically the idea here. A is supposed to be impossible for A to depend on something else, and if A is possible, and it's impossible for it to depend on something else, then the A must be. But why must something for which it is impossible to depend upon something else itself exist? Well, anyway. He seems to think that from the real possibility of a thing existing, it must exist. But why think that the metaphysical structure of the world is like mathematics? Okay, well, this is a bunch of really involved reasoning, but I thought it might be interesting at one point for any student of theology to at least know what's back there in the 13th century, and maybe it will pique somebody's interest to study Scotus a bit more. Okay, Scotus has many more things to say. He distinguishes between intuitive and abstract cognition. And he says that he seems to want to say that we have intuitive cognition of things around us. And intuitive cognition is a cognition of a thing as it really exists in the world. So if I have a cognition that there's a sheep in the pasture, that would be an intuitive cognition. Presumably, I directly know that there's a sheep in the pasture. But he does claim that most of our knowledge is due from an abstraction from the phantasm. Of course, I'm being given this experience of sheep and pasture, but in order to have that experience, a certain abstraction has to take place. And this whole notion of abstraction is tied to this idea of abstract cognition. The intellect can know many things through abstract cognition, though sometimes not whether the thing abstracted exists or not. So it's a very important notion in Scotus, this distinction between abstract and intuitive cognition. He argues against divine illumination, particularly Henry of Gent's form of divine illumination that harkens back to Augustine and the Neoplatonic tradition. Scotus argues that we can have certain knowledge of principles because they are self-evident through their terms. As long as one grasps the meaning of the terms, one immediately sees that the principle is true. We don't need any divine illumination there. Experience can also result in certain knowledge, such as our knowledge that magnets attract iron. Why do we need divine illumination here? We can have certain knowledge of our acts and our mental states as to whether we are understanding or willing. I can know my own thinking. Why do I need divine illumination as a necessary condition for the possibility to know my own thinking? We can also have certain sensory knowledge thanks to the same self-evident principle that grounds the certainty of induction. We know that one thing will follow another. Why do I need divine illumination for that? So we have Scotus rejecting divine illumination. And as I said earlier, he rejects hylomorphism. He is not an advocate of universal hylomorphism. You'll remember that hylomorphism comes from the Greek. Matter, form. Everything is made of matter, form. He argues that prime matter could indeed exist without form. Then he argues that substances can indeed exist without matter. And he basically denies this idea descending from Aristotle that matter is potentiality and form is actuality. He says this is a particular kind of metaphysical prejudice, he believes, certainly in the tradition, but it doesn't need to go that way. He denies this aligning of potentiality with matter. He denies that substances have more than one substantial form. In fact, that's very famous in Scotus. And he claims, this is an interesting claim, that the body has a bodily form that keeps the parts together as a body, even after the form of the soul leaves. See? So the soul is not the form of the body. The bodily form is the form of the body. And the soul can, in principle, leave without the body collapsing into something else. And actually, when you think about this, this is very clear that we can have bodies in the hospital today alive on life support, but with no real mental life, this would be certainly more in keeping with SCOTUS than not in keeping with SCOTUS. Okay, we have a few more things to say about SCOTUS. We'll come right back. This is Dr. Dennis Bielfeldt. Come back for the next lectures. A little theology now in SCOTUS on natural law and sin and grace. So I'm Dr. Dennis Bielfeldt with the Christ School of Theology. Thank you.